Hey guys, what's up? So, this video is going to be about diving and dive gear. So, it's going to kind of be, I promised this a while ago. I've been busy, had stuff to do. So, I kind of had to force myself to sit down and make this video. But anyway, so today we're going to talk about scuba diving and some of the things that some people ask me whenever I get questions about it, and also some of the fears and some of the myths and some of the realities. And we're also going to talk about things that I see other divers do that are both good and bad, funny stuff that I've seen on some of my dives, and also just stupid stuff that you should never, ever do that some people do anyway. So, this is going to pertain to you, particularly if you're a beginner diver or you're thinking about diving. Um, if you're an expert diver or you've done it for a long time and you just want to brush up, or you're curious to see what I use or what kind of gear that I use or what kind of tips and tricks I have, that's cool too. Um, I myself, actually, let's go ahead and start with that. I'm just an open water diver. I'm not a dive master. I'm not an authority. I'm not a pro. I'm a recreational diver. My story on diving is when I got started, we did a lot of traveling. Like I said, I used to work for the airlines. I believe I said that in one of our previous videos. I'm not sure if I did or not, but I used to work for the airlines. Reason I got started doing that is because my dad has worked for the airlines all my life. So I took my first flight when I was maybe 2 or 3, and I've been flying ever since. And so because of that, a lot of the places we've traveled to have been places with really pretty beaches. And up until recently, I didn't really uh, I love the water, but I didn't really appreciate the beaches. And I guess when I got a little bit older, I thought, it'd be really cool to do a little snorkeling. So I started snorkeling at some of the places we went to, and there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to see, but I couldn't see because I couldn't get deep enough. So that kind of sparked the interest for scuba diving. I did a practice dive in Cozumel, and I got hooked. And I kind of dropped it for a bit, and then I picked it back up in I want to say a couple years ago, and or 2 or 3 years ago, I went to Florida. I was in Disney, and one of their attractions is an aquarium. Fun fact, it's the second largest in the U.S. And I saw some of the divers swimming in there, and I said, "Well, how much do they get paid?" I asked one of the cast members, and the guy said, "Well, they actually don't get paid. Those are guests that come and they dive here. This is where they recertify." And after that, I said, you know what? After seeing these guys do it and being able to sit down at 25 feet on the dry side and watch people dive and get this close to the sharks and the fish, I want to go do that. I definitely want to do that. And so I got certified, and that's how I started diving. But enough about that. Let's start with some of the fears and questions I get asked. So, something I get asked all the time, and this is probably the most popular question that people ask me: what about the sharks? Aren't you afraid of the sharks? Do the sharks bother you? Here's the answer: no. Generally, if you're in open water, it's extremely rare. Unless you dive in a place where they do shark feedings a lot, like off the coast of Mexico. There's a couple of small towns where the divers there, they actually do shark dives. And unless you go there and you go looking for sharks, 9 times out of 10 when you dive, you're not going to see one. The scariest thing you're probably going to see is either a jellyfish or a barracuda. So it's extremely rare that you're going to see one. If you do see one as a diver, to be honest, the sharks aren't really interested in you. They may be curious, but they're not interested, because as a diver, when you exhale, you make bubbles, and sharks don't like bubbles. It scares off the fish because of the noise it makes and the breathing, and we're just really big noisy fish that they're not sure about. Some of them are actually friendly. Some of them will actually come up to you, but for the most part, sharks usually stay clear of divers. If they do approach you, they're just checking you out, and then they'll usually go on about their business and do whatever it was they were doing. Um, Also, just so you know, 9 times out of 10, again, when you get in the water, the sharks already know they're there. You're there. They have a very, very, very acute sense of smell, and hearing and taste. So they can smell you, they can hear you, they can taste you, they can sense you. They actually can sense electricity, so the electric currents that move your muscles, they can pick up on that. They know you're in the water long before you can even see them. So they could be 2, 3 miles away and they know you're in the water already. So uh, I've yet to meet a diver that has come up to me and say I've been bit or attacked by a shark. I hasn't happened. And again, I visited a lot of coastal regions, so this isn't just within the span of the past 3 years that I've been diving. It's in general. I've talked to a lot of divers. I know a couple of divers. Even in my dive class, the dive shops, I've never met a diver that's told me, hey, I got attacked by a shark and it's put me off for life, or hey, a shark came up to me and it scared me to death. It just wouldn't leave me alone. I've never heard about that. So if that's one of your fears, honestly, that's up to you. Take it or leave it. But I will also say this: there's a lot of people who are afraid of sharks that still dive. So it's one of those things. It's kind of like if you drive a car, you could get into an accident, but the likelihood of that is pretty low. So take it or leave it, up to you. Next thing, I can't swim that well. That's what I hear a lot of. People tell me, oh, I can't swim, I can't do this, I can't do that. And to be honest, you don't have to be an all-star swimmer to scuba dive. You don't have to be a pro, you don't have to be a super athlete. Scuba diving is a very easygoing, slow sport. That's why there's a lot of older people who do it, because it doesn't require a lot of, sorry about my phone, it doesn't require a lot of exertion. It really doesn't. There's also different types of diving. Some may require a little more exertion than others, but for the most part, it's a pretty easy sport to get into. It's not something that's going to require a huge amount of stamina or strength on your part. I will say that there is a certain level of fitness that you should be at, so you shouldn't be suffering from any heart problems or serious injuries or anything like that. But when it comes to things like asthma and stuff like that, you may want to kind of ask your doctor when it comes to those kinds of illnesses. But as far as typical super fit, no, you don't have to be going to the gym every day and eating broccoli and kale and fish and chicken and 3 squares a day. You don't have to be super fit to dive. You don't have to be, another thing, you don't have to be super, super thin. I'm a thin guy. You can probably tell by the way you're looking at me. I'm a thin guy. And so I fit in all the gear. In fact, I wear a medium to small in most of my scuba gear. As far as, except in my gloves, I wear large there. But people who are bigger can still scuba dive. It's like shirts. They still make that stuff in XXL. Or maybe you're in medium, or you find you have weird fits. Chances are, if you can find a shirt and pants and shoes that fit you, the gear will fit you when you scuba dive. So you don't have to be a certain size, and it's not for people of a certain size when you scuba dive. Okay. Next thing, actually, let me jump back to the all-star swimmer thing, super athlete. You don't have to be a super athlete. You don't have to be this, that, or the other. And I will also say that a lot of the gear that you get, it does the work for you. For instance, how about the fins? You don't have to swim as hard because you have fins that do most of the swimming for you. We'll get more into that later on. But another thing that people tell me also is, I'm afraid to go in too deep. I'm afraid of the deep. Well, to be honest, most scuba diving takes place 20 to 40 feet. I'm certified to go 60 feet. That's the beginning certification. I've been to 80 feet. Okay? And that's kind of, if you go to Mexico, they tend to push the limits down there. So keep that in mind. But as far as going with the deep, deep, dark, scary stuff where you don't see anything, generally the fish aren't down there. You can get certified to go that deep, but I don't see the appeal personally. All the fish stay where you can see, and they tend to be in the shallow places where the coral is easily visible from the surface. So, FYI on that too. Um, let's see. All right, so I guess we'll move right on into the gear then. We'll start with, I guess we'll start with the fin. I already pulled that out once. So fins, like I said in my other video, in my, how about that? I use Cressy. This is my preferred brand to use. This particular model of fin is an open back fin. So basically, I put my dive boots on. This clips shut over my heel. That's it, and then it's around my foot. So I do wear dive boots with these. You can buy some fins that you just put over your feet, where you don't have to put any socks or anything on. You just slip them on, kind of like slippers. I prefer these. One, because whenever I'm getting into the water, I'm on a dive boat, I can just wear my dive boots. It's like wearing a pair of sneakers, so that's cool. The other thing is, personally, I feel more comfortable with the dive boots because that way, when you do, no matter what kind of fin you have, you will have some contact with your skin on your feet and the actual fin, and the dive boot basically eliminates that, so there's no rashes or no rubbing of any type, and I don't have to worry about that. So, and they're moderately cheap too. And like I said, again, you can walk around with them, you can use them on the beach. If you've done your dive and you're just hanging out on the beach, you can wear them. If you're about to do your dive but you're not quite ready to get in, you can wear them, and of course you can wear them on the dive boat like I mentioned earlier. So, that's the fin. And also, it does make life so much easier when you put these on and you swim with them. They do a lot of the work for you, so there's that. Next thing I'm gonna grab is dive gloves. Now, these are Neosport, and my wetsuit is also Neosport. I didn't get Cressy as far as this goes, or any of my neoprene stuff. I didn't use Cressy, just because this is cheaper and it works just as good. So I decided to just go with this. You can buy it on Amazon. They come in a pair, and I think these are, yeah, it says it right there. They're 3mm. That's what I prefer. I wear a 7mm wetsuit just because I get cold. So just so you know, 77 degrees is cold. It's cool, I should say. It's kind of like getting into a cool bathtub. Not cold, but it's not really warm either. If you've ever been in a warm bathtub, that's about 82, 83 degrees. Not hot, not cold, just like lukewarm. That's about 80 degrees. So bear that in mind whenever you do your dives. If somebody tells you the water is 74 degrees, don't think that it's going to be like being in a spa or taking a hot shower. It's not. It's going to be kind of cool if it's not cold. Okay, so these Velcro up. I got myself a large in these. That's just what works for me. Reason I wear these when I dive, you don't have to wear dive gloves. In fact, accessing your gear is probably easier without dive gloves, but then again, how often are you going to have to do something that requires you to have absolute finesse dexterity when you're diving? The answer is not a lot. All the stuff is made usually to work with gloves. Reason I wear these: one, it keeps skin from it keeps me warm. We'll start with that. Two, if there are sharks, it keeps your skin covered, so the shark doesn't get a glimpse of it and think, "Ooh, fish." You know, just a flash of that, and it might think, "Hey, that's food. That's fish. Fish are relatively that color, right?" So that's the second reason. Third reason, it protects you from things like fire coral and jellyfish. Now you can have down to a 0.5 millimeter, 0.5 millimeter wetsuit and gloves, and that will protect you from a jellyfish stings. Obviously, I picked the thicker you go, the warmer it will be when you're in the water. So 3mm for me, and of course it offers extra protection from things like fire coral and jellyfish. By the way, if you don't know, fire coral is like poison ivy underwater, except it burns you. It stings. It's very painful. So, just so you know, you don't know what it is, and you spend a lot of time at the beaches, look it up. It would be very beneficial to know. All right. We'll move on to the dive boot. This is my dive boot. You'll notice that this is a Cressy, and I bought this at, can't remember how much it was, to be honest with you. Bought it on Amazon. It's got a rubber sole. It's nothing super sporty or anything like that, just to keep you from slipping when you're walking around wet surfaces and to protect the bottom of your foot from rocks and stuff like that. It's like a really, really thick sock. If you know, it's again, I apologize for that. Like a really, really thick sock. As far as sizing goes, the sizing's on the inside. It's just like wearing a shoe or shopping for a shoe. You want to make sure it fits. You want to make sure it's comfortable. You will be wearing these over just your foot. There will be only skin in this. You can buy dive socks if you want. I chose not to because I dive in tropics, and honestly, this is just enough protection. Then when you consider you got to wear the flipper, the flipper or the fin over it, these aren't going to be all that exposed. Something to consider though is if you're in the water and for whatever reason you have to live without your fin for a little bit, or you have to operate without your fin, this will be exposed. So make sure it's something you're comfortable with. It's not going to fall off. These are stretchy, okay, and they do zip up around your foot. But they do zip up around your foot, and there's a little bit of leeway there, so it's not like it's gonna squeeze and kill your foot. But do make sure you get the right size, because it can cut off circulation if you get the wrong size. So shop for it like you're shopping for a shoe, and make sure that when you do shop for these, you try them on. If you're using open toe fins, you try them on with the fin. Believe me, it makes a difference. Okay. Next thing we're going to talk about is the BCD. So again, I did say earlier that a lot of the gear for your diving does a lot of the work. Well, this does, I want to say, about 70% of the work, okay, as far as swimming is concerned. Flippers do about 20 to 30%. This does about 70 to 60%. Reason being, this is literally a life vest, okay? It's literally an inflatable life vest. So this hose here, you can actually breathe into it and it will inflate. So you see that? So it does inflate. There's different styles of BCDs. This one in particular, your oxygen tank goes here, by the way. It straps up here. Excuse me. This particular style is my favorite style, and it's called a jacket style BCD. BCD stands for buoyancy control device. This does a lot of the work because right before you dive, what this does is it takes a little bit of air from your oxygen tank. You don't have to do that manually. This is a fail-safe in case, the oxygen tank isn't flowing or you're out of air, there's not enough air to inflate your BCD or whatever, but your oxygen tank has a hose that connects here. When that hose is connected here, you will simply push, where is it? There we go. You simply push this button and it will inflate your BCD automatically. Once you do that, you can control, you got to adjust depending on your weight and how much weight you have in the BCD, and I'll get to that in a minute too, but you can control how you're oriented in the water. So basically, once you find an ideal level of air to have in your BCD with your weight, then you can decide, okay, this is where I want to be. And so basically, once you get there, it's like free floating in space when you're in the water. All you have to do is pick a direction to swim in. Up, down, sideways, left, diagonally down, horizontally, doesn't matter. You control all your movement with your breath. Breathe in the think of your lungs as balloons. You breathe in, and you breathe in deep enough and hold enough air in your lungs or enough gas in your lungs, you will start to float. If you breathe out, you exhale, you start to sink. So you got to find that middle ground while you're breathing, and this BCD helps you do that. And once you do that, then that's how you control your up and down movement. If you need to ascend, you need to go up, you feel like you're going to hit a rock or something as you're swimming, you start taking in deeper breaths, and you will automatically just rise above it. If you are trying to get lower or you want to sit on the seafloor, you exhale until you're on the seafloor, and then you keep the minimum amount of breath in your lungs. But as far as diving, like I said earlier, it's a sport. So it's something that you have to practice to be good at. You're not just gonna, some people are naturally talented at it. I had some level of natural aptitude for it. I wasn't like the all-star super jock that just picked up a football and threw a 100-yard touchdown. No. But I did have some level of aptitude for it, and with practice I've gotten comfortable being in the water and in my gear. So once you get comfortable and you get a feel for it, then you'll be able to control that buoyancy without having to play with this too much. And if you find yourself having to play with this a lot when you first get in, you're putting in air and it's too much and you start going up, and then you're jettisoning air and you're dropping down too fast. You got to find that middle ground. It takes practice, and you'll get to practice that when you do your dive class or your certification class. Another thing about the BCD is it also has weight pockets. Okay, so this particular BCD has a integrated weight system, which means that the weights are actually in their own pockets, and then they clip in there. I don't know if I want to do all that because I'll have to take it out, and it's inflated right now, so it's kind of, I'm not going to do that. But basically, it clips in here on the inside. Obviously, just imagine it's on the inside, and the handle is the only thing that sticks out. And like I said, so when you weight yourself, because when you put on a wetsuit and you put on your dive boots, that's all neoprene. Neoprene wants to float, so you got to have something to weigh you down. This is what that's for. Now, if you're caught in an emergency and you need to immediately surface and you need to just get up to the surface, nothing else matters, you can actually grab a hold of this handle and pull. You see that tab moving? It's a release mechanism, and you can just drop your weights and surface. It's a cool mechanism there. Other weight mechanisms, some BCDs don't have that, so what people do is they use weight belts. That's I have a weight belt. I never use it, but it's there in case I need it for backup. That's the dump valve, so you're here in the air leaving the BCD. And that's about it for the BCD. This particular model, as you've seen, it's a Cressy R1, and it's what came with the pack. And now I think I'm going to move on to the regulator. Oh, by the way, a lot of people out there think they're Rambo, and I've seen a dozen guys who like to get these huge dive knives, you know, like you're going to go fight shark fighting underwater, you plan to take out a great white. I use this. It's a cut tool. And a lot of guys, you ask them, why do you have that knife? Oh, for protection. Well, I mean, there's really no sharks in this. Oh, well, I have it for entanglement hazards, in case I get tangled up in something. Okay, well, I have this for entanglement hazards. All you gotta do is pull the line in here, whatever's entangling you, string, whatever it is, pull it in there, and then just yank down on it, and it'll get caught and pushed up against the blade, and that'll cut it. And there's absolutely no risk that you cut something like a hose. It's not going to happen. It's just too small for that to happen. So whereas with a dive knife, you get entangled, and the first thing you want to do is start slashing around, cutting yourself free. But what happens if you cut a hose that's back here, or this hose? Uh-oh. So, alright. Next thing we'll do is we'll have a look at the last piece of equipment that I've got. I don't have a tank because it's a pain to fly with and a pain to travel with, and I live in Houston, Texas. I don't dive in Galveston. You can't see anything in there anyway. So and then you got to have it hydrostatically tested. It's easier to rent a tank for $8 than it is to go the whole 9 yards and pay $80 and have a tank. So this is the last and probably one of the most important pieces of equipment that you're gonna find on a diving rig. This is my regulator set and dive computer. So you have an oxygen gauge here, and it reads off of the piece that plugs into the BCD. And so this actually reads how much oxygen you have in your tank, because once you plug it in, this part goes on top of the valve on your tank. You open that up and you set it down, and you screw it in, and it sits kind of like this on the on the top of your tank behind your head. Okay, so when that's hooked up, this tells you how much air you have in your tank left. So keep an eye on this. So when you go diving, you usually pre-plan and you say, okay, when we get to say, okay, so a tank has about 3,000 psi of air in it, right? So let's say you get down to 1,500 pounds of air in your tank. Okay, we'll say that 1,500 is where we're going to head back. I know at Disney they say 500, where that little, I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, there we go. There's an orange kind of red zone in there. That's the 500 psi zone. You start getting below that, it starts getting hard to breathe. So have a plan. You don't want to be out there having fun, and I mean everybody does when they dive, and then you end up running out of air. And the feeling that you get when you start to run out of air is if you've ever drank a water bottle down as a kid and then tried to suck the air out of the water bottle, or tried to crumple the water bottle by sucking on it, and you just can't get anything out of it. That's kind of what it feels like to run out of air. Alright? The other thing is a dive computer. You don't have to have one of these, but I recommend it. It makes life easy. As soon as it hits the water, it tells you what the water temperature is, how deep you are, how much air you have left, how fast you're ascending, if you're ascending too fast, how long you should decompress. And again, that's stuff that you'll learn when you enter your dive class and you read the book. But having a dive computer is handy. You can always have a analog depth finder, but then you don't have the computer. And usually if the guys that use an analog depth finder have a dive watch, and it looks like this, and it does everything that this does. Some people dive without the computer, but then you have to do everything on paper with pen, and it's just, you don't want to do that. Alright? It's a pain. I tried that one time, and I won't try it again. Regulator. Alright, so obviously it's what you breathe through. It's not hooked up to a tank, so I'm obviously not getting any air out of it. This is the Cressy Compact. I love this regulator. It works for me. It's not super fancy, and it's like I said in the other video, it's not the top of the line, but it works. And the most important thing to me when I have a regulator is that I'm able to breathe. Some people might say that's not the most important thing, but it is to me. It has the dual T exhaust vents, so the bubbles don't go straight up and into your face. They'll come out and around, which is nice. It doesn't obscure your vision. It's also got a dive and pre-dive, so that if you jump in the water, you don't end up free-flowing, and I'll get into that in a minute too. So you have, once you're in the water, switch to dive. When you're out of the water, or you're about to get in, pre-dive. Cool little setting. So both of my second stages, or regulators, my primary and my backup, or my octo, or my secondary, whatever you want to call it, they're both the same type of regulator. You can have different regulators if you want. You can have, say, a Scuba Pro X1 whatever, and you can have a Mares T23. I'm just throwing names out here. These aren't real regulators. And the brands are real, but regulators aren't. You can mix them up. There are some people that are more comfortable with certain regulators, and it's like driving your car. You might like the air conditioning set a certain way, and you might want the steering to feel a certain way, and you might want the radio on a certain channel. It's the same thing with this stuff. Whatever works for you, whatever you're most comfortable with, go with that. And of course, this is my first stage. This is a component. When you unplug all of this stuff from around it, this by itself is called the first stage. And what this does is it literally takes 3,000 pounds of pressure from that tank, that oxygen tank, and it drops it to a manageable breathing pressure. So could you imagine trying to breathe in? It's like trying to breathe in through a jet engine. It would never work, right? The air would just suffocate you because you're getting so much at once. So it drops it. The first stage drops the pressure. Second stage seals it in a valve so that when you breathe in, it comes out. And then when you breathe out, it closes up, so it's not trying to force air down your throat. That's how the first stage and second stage work. First stage, second stage. All right. So that covers all of that. Now, one more thing I want to discuss. A lot of people think that diving is expensive and it's for the rich people. Well, frankly, that depends on you and where you live. If you have a taste for very expensive gear like Scuba Pro or the high-end Mares stuff or the high-end Cressy stuff even, yeah, it's going to get expensive, especially if you don't live near water. So if you, like for me, it's kind of expensive just because I have to travel. But because I've traveled for so long and I know where to go, and I do a lot of cruises and I do a lot of beach trips, so I just kind of roll that in with my regular vacation. So if I know that I'm going with my family to the beach a year from now, I'll plan to take my scuba stuff just because I know I'm going to be near the water. It's very rare, in fact it almost never happens, that I exclusively decide to go on a trip just for a dive. I hardly ever do that. But if you're going to do dive trips in particular and you decide you want to go to Hawaii and you live in Canada, yeah, it's going to be expensive. Like I said, depending on where you live and what kind of gear you buy, that's going to determine how expensive it's going to be for you. If you buy stuff off brands that nobody's ever heard of or you don't see a lot, and there are some, and they're pretty good actually, or you mix up your gear. So you might buy Cressy regulators and you might buy a Scuba Pro or a Ziegel. That's a crazy expensive VCD, by the way. But you get the idea. You can mix and match, and it all still works. All the scuba gear is generally universal. Just double check your first stages because you might have a din or a yoke. The one I showed you was a yoke. That's the one I prefer to use. That's the one that's more widely used, and that's the one that's easiest, in my opinion, to use. Other things that people sometimes ask me about is how often do you have to replace your gear? Well, that's the thing. If you buy this stuff and you buy pretty decent scuba gear, you probably won't have to replace it for another 8 to 10 years, depending on how much you dive. So, there you go. So keep in mind, this stuff is an investment when you buy it. So, and also keep in mind, this is the stuff that you got to get in the water with. So it's got to be the stuff that you are okay with in an underwater situation should something happen, or should you have an emergency, you have to make an emergency ascent or whatever. This is the stuff that you will be relying on, so make sure it's something you're comfortable with. Also, I apologize for this video being so long, but there was a lot to cover. Your gear, as far as scuba diving, is designed to break to help you. And what I mean by that is, it by no means is good when something breaks. But for example, if your regulator, all the mechanical stuff is designed to break to help you. So if your regulator breaks, it's going to start free flowing, which means it's just going to start pushing air out nonstop. It's just going to start bubbling like a fountain. And so you'll know that it's broken, obviously, and you can actually breathe, and you'll get trained to breathe through that bubble stream when you do your scuba certification. But when I say break to help you, so that's how the regulator breaks. Now, could you imagine if it broke and it just stopped supplying air? So what's worse? Your air supply is running out kind of rapidly, but you've got enough time to get to the surface and you can still breathe, versus you can't breathe at all. So you can see where that kind of helps out. same with the BCD. When something happens on it, again, if it breaks, it's going to seal itself up, and so you'll have to manually release the air or manually breathe air in there, but at least you'll be able to actually work it, versus you lose all the air, all your buoyancy, and you're weighted, and you just start to sink. And the only way to get out of that is just to ditch your BCD and your oxygen supply, unless you're going to sit there and try to undo your oxygen tank and swim up with it, which you could, but the BCD eliminates that scenario because it's designed to break to help you. So keep that in mind. I think that's going to be it for this video. I will be posting my dive in Florida relatively soon, and in case you were wondering, I did use the orange sea diver masks. It's just what I preferred, and I'm happy that I took that one. it was just better all around. So hopefully I'll post that later on today. We'll see. And I think the next video after this will probably be one about flying, because I actually flew with somebody when I went to Florida who'd never flown before, and I had to educate him on how to fly. So if anything, that just pushes that up to the front of the agenda there. So alright, sorry this video was so long. If you're still here, awesome, thanks for watching. That's all I have, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.